Jason Walker was walking across the yard of his rural Tennessee home when he heard a voice call his name from somewhere in the yard. Jason turned, slightly impatient. It was 6:30 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, and he was eager to get on with his preparations for the upcoming week. Looking to the adjacent yard, he saw his 37-year-old neighbor, Gregory Scott Hale, standing at the fence and motioning for him to come closer. Jason sighs inwardly but approaches the short chain-link fence separating them anyway, having no idea that the conversation he was about to have would be one of the most horrifying of his life. "Where's your backhoe?" Scott says by way of greeting. Jason replies that it isn't there, and he won't have it back for a few days. Scott appears somewhat irritated by Jason's response, prompting him to ask why Scott is suddenly so interested in his backhoe. Scott, in response, makes a tasteless and gruesome joke about needing it to hide the evidence. Jason, nonplussed, stares at him in silence, prompting Scott to continue by pointing to the 2 5-gallon buckets sitting just a few feet away, near Scott's burn pit. He explains that he tried burning everything in the burn pit, but it hadn't worked, so he figures he should just bury it all as fast as possible. Jason listens to this reasoning for the use of his backhoe before growing tired of his weird neighbor's stupid joke, and abruptly telling Scott he needs to go and that he'll talk to him later. 3 hours later at 9:30 p.m., Sheriff's Corporal Brad Roberts is sitting at the front desk of the Coffee County Sheriff's Department when a man approaches, tense and anxious to speak with someone immediately. Corporal Roberts tells him to come back first thing tomorrow morning, but the man is insistent. It's Jason Walker, and he needs the police to listen to the joke his neighbor has just told him, because the longer he's thought about it, the less it started feeling like a joke. At first, the corporal is skeptical as it sounds ridiculous. Violent crime is almost unheard of in tiny Coffee County. But Jason is so adamant, so sure, that the deputy starts getting a sick feeling as well. He radios for 2 more officers, Deputy Rainey and criminal investigator Dendy, to accompany Jason back to his home to check out the story. Upon arriving at Jason's property, investigators made sure to come in through the back, driving without headlights so as not to alert anyone in the Scott household. Jason and the 2 officers walk through the darkness, shining their flashlights through the chain-link fence to illuminate the 2 5-gallon buckets, their bright white plastic almost glowing in the dim light. C.I. Dendy picks up a garden hoe lying in Jason's grass and uses it to reach over the fence and snag the handle of the closest bucket, lifting it over to their side. Grasping the lid, he peels it off to reveal the ghastly contents, causing all 3 men to reel back in horror. It's a woman's severed head and hand. 3 days earlier, on July 6th, CCTV footage at Oak Liquor shows a woman entering the store at around 3:30, striding in confidently and heading to the back of the store before stopping and looking around hesitantly. This is Lisa Marie Hyder, and unbeknownst to everyone in the store, this is her last day alive. She scans the back shelves, curling her long auburn ponytail around her fingers and adjusting her large black sunglasses before walking up to the man who has just passed her in the aisle. She isn't from here. She's only traveled up from where she lives in Dunlap, Tennessee to spend time with her ex-husband and 2 young children, the youngest of which is only a year old. Just before entering the store, Lisa had been on the phone with her ex-husband, trying to get a ride from where she was to the house, but he was unloading a truck in Huntsville and couldn't get to her until he was finished. Lisa was stuck where she was, and she needed a ride, which is why police suspect she approached the man in the liquor store. As for why she chose the liquor store, according to her ex-husband, Lisa had been allegedly struggling recently with alcoholism, which is why they'd split up a few months earlier. Though she had struggled with a dependency to alcohol before, a recent devastating piece of news had kicked her problems into overdrive. Lisa had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer and had only been given 6 months to live. Lisa was reportedly beyond devastated by the news, drinking to cope and apparently end her life faster, spiraling emotionally and behaving more recklessly than she usually did. As she's talking to both the man and the cashier, She adjusts her sunglasses, and for a brief moment, a black right eye is visible. How she received this particular injury is still unknown, but it would pale in comparison to the injuries she would receive later that night. Because the man she's speaking to and will eventually exit the liquor store with is Gregory Scott Hale. Back in Jason's yard, C.I. Dendy and Deputy Rainey are radioing for backup, ordering for crime scene units to be deployed immediately and for search warrants to be written. As backup arrives, they head into the Scott residence to place Gregory Scott Hale under arrest, finding him sleeping on a couch in one of the filthy garages. Given what they've just discovered in the white buckets, the detectives were no doubt disturbed by the items Scott has decided to use to decorate this space. These items were later discovered to be old Halloween props from a haunted attraction Scott had worked the previous year. Scott makes no attempt to resist, and when initially confronted, admits to being the one who killed the woman and had placed her limbs and head in the two buckets, and had buried the rest of her in the burn pit nearby. Police take him in, and the following audio is the never-before-heard interview from that night. It has been analyzed by a licensed professional counselor.
Scott, you were talking to James out there at your house a minute ago, and he advised you of your rights. Okay, I'm Chad Parton. I don't know if you remember me or not. I worked with your mom up here for many, many years.
Chad Parton working with Scott's mother would almost certainly imply she'd worked as a member of law enforcement. But while Scott's mother, father, and son all being mere feet away asleep in the house while Scott committed this murder, none of their statements or information have ever been released.
Anyway, I'm going to go over your rights again this time since we're up here in the office, okay? If you decide to answer any questions now without a lawyer present, you still have the right to stop answering at any time. You also have the right to stop answering at any time until you talk with a lawyer, okay? This isn't a mission, and it's just that we advised you of your rights, okay? It's right there, Scott.
Unless it's over.
Well, I know you was getting into some details there, but you kind of skipped ahead a pretty good bit. How'd you meet this girl?
She came up to me at the liquor store and said, can I go home with you?
Here in town?
Yeah, at Oak.
What day was this?
Friday.
Is this the girl that you brought in to the house? I mean, your mom and dad saw her? Okay.
The home detectives are referring to would be that of Scott's mother and father, as 37-year-old Scott had lost his job sometime prior and moved himself and his 14-year-old son into his parents' house. According to a narcissistic narrative spun by Scott, which he repeatedly mentions and embellishes throughout the interview, Lisa had apparently immediately found him so attractive that day. She immediately begged him to take her to his home and had decided she wanted to live with him in his mom's house before they had even left the liquor store. Then, once reaching the house and sitting in the grimy garage where Scott kept all of his Halloween decorations, she apparently couldn't keep her clothes on, and Scott had to repeatedly ask her to put her shirt back on because his parents might return from picking up his son at any minute. Considering Lisa was only in Manchester that day to meet with her children, whom, according to those who knew her, she adored more than life itself, it seems far more likely she simply asked Scott for a ride, and the rest of this story is a fabrication, though it's likely we'll never know for sure.
Made what I was drinking on, and she got her a pint of 100 proof vodka, and you can come hang out with me. And then she got in her head that she could just move in, and Mom ain't gonna let that happen, We did have, it was consensual, and she wanted to be choked, and us being drunk, and
Was this Friday night or was this
Friday night, it got carried away, and I guess I strangled her, and
Where was y'all at when this happened?
in my garage.
Was you using a rope or?
Hands in a shirt. The shirt's in the garbage can in the garage.
At this point in the interview, Scott once again begins boasting about how into him Lisa was, describing in explicit detail how much she wanted him, how turned on she was by his tattoos, not once mentioning his thoughts or feelings concerning her. It's unclear why Scott is so desperate to convince the detectives that Lisa was interested in him that he's making up unconvincing details. He may be trying to make sure he isn't on the hook for assault, or it's just the narcissistic side of his personality coming through. Either way, detectives just keep trying their best to keep him on track.
So, show me how you done that.
And then I got off, I guess, and she didn't. She's like, keep choking me. And I kept on. I put a shirt around her neck and tightened it up. And, she's supposed to have, when it was, and she never fought. She never did. And next thing you know, she's dead. And I'm like, this is great. And I guess, I don't know, I got scared or nervous or I don't know.
Scott's account of strangulation is interesting because according to the autopsy, the soft tissue of the neck above the fourth cervical vertebrae are examined. No soft tissue hemorrhage is seen. The hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage are intact. No contusions of the neck are seen. While the autopsy does conclusively rule that Lisa's death was caused by homicidal violence, no single cause is listed. There were no drugs other than alcohol in her system, and her lungs showed no evidence of smoke inhalation. So exactly how Scott ended her life or why he would feel the need to lie about the exact manner of her death is unknown.
What happened after that, Scott? I mean, you realized that she had passed. Did you try to give her CPR or anything? Did you try to resuscitate her or anything?
No, I don't know how to do CPR.
Okay.
I smacked her on the face a few times and
no response.
I opened up her eyes and her eyes were not all the way shut.
Yeah.
I pulled up her eyelid and covered, and then moved it. Her pupil didn't dilate or move or nothing. I've been wanting to go into a psychiatric hospital because I've already been having urges, and they've just been getting greater and greater, and I don't know if it's what, but I guess before I could get to one. So I've been watching a lot of serial killer stuff. I don't know if that was getting in my head. I've been having some crazy things happening at the house, like as far as unexplainable, supernatural, whatever. I suffer from sleep paralysis, not sleep apnea, but paralysis. I'll come to, I'm completely paralyzed and I can't move.
Despite Scott's best efforts to make himself seem troubled or possibly insane, what he's describing isn't a disorder, as it happens to people fairly regularly.
But you're conscious.
Yeah, and not this last time it happened, but the time before. Because I looked it up on the internet, and I found out a lot of people that claim to be abducted by aliens suffer from it. I've also looked up, it was a demon, and anybody who knows my reputation knows I'm into the dark stuff. The time before it happened, I come to, it was a deep paralysis. And I could hear something above me breathing, and something slid my fan. The way I was laying on the bed, something slid my fan all the way over, like where I look over laying down. Fan stayed running, and that's impossible because that cord's barely long enough to plug in where it was.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, I've had a headache constant. It's been about 2.5 months, and a beeping sound for about 2 weeks. I had an episode, give or take a week ago, and the beeping sound's back in my head. And it's just ever since then, it's just my thoughts ain't been right.
Yeah.
How long have you been out of rehab?
This question, posed by Detective Cheryl, seemingly comes out of nowhere and isn't mentioned at any point in the interview before or after now. Since both of the detectives seem to know Scott from before this crime, it might just be prior knowledge.
I left it. I didn't even stay 24 hours because...
How long ago was it been when you went there?
About 2 Februarys ago.
You ain't used any meth in the past couple of months or nothing like that?
Mm-mm.
No pills?
I took an Adderall.
When did you take it?
Maybe a week ago.
Pretty much all you've been doing is drinking, man.
Drinking, smoking weed. I like to do Percocets and Hydros, but I don't take those to get high on them. I've abused my body so much, I hurt.
So once you realize that and she's there and you're like, okay, how long did you sit and think or...
Did you call anybody, tell your parents? Or?
Mm-mm.
So what happened from there?
I covered her up with a blanket on my love seat. I'm pondering what to do, which I should have just called y'all. But another part of me was wanting, was like, you done went this far, and that's when I pulled her off love's seat and I put her underneath the boat. Kind of threw some stuff on top of her, so in case mom or dad walked out there and looked to see if she was there, because, I walked in and told mom, I was like, well, she's gone. She got mad because I wouldn't stand up to you and about her staying here, and she just took off walking. I waited till they went to sleep, and I guess I just let my twisted side take over. I do have personality issues.
It's unknown what Scott's official diagnoses are, but given his potential parasitic lifestyle and the seeming lack of emotion here, it would be tempting to guess that he has a form of antisocial personality disorder. However, without knowing his full history, it's hard to be certain.
After they went to sleep, I pulled her out from underneath the boat, and I gazed on her for a minute. I laid down beside her and was just touching.
Mm-hmm. Was she still warm?
She was starting to lose it, and I forgot what the word is when the blood settles.
Rigor.
No, that's
Pulling.
stiffening.
Pulling.
Yeah. And there's already, splotches. And she was starting to get a little rigor mortis, but not too bad. Her arms, they still kind of, when I drug her out, because I grabbed her by her ankles, and her arms still kind of, but her legs was a little stiff. In my head, I was thinking maybe she's just faking. There's still a part of me that was hoping.
Maybe she just passed out or something.
Yeah. There's another knife in the garage. It's about this long, gray blade. Got a machete handle with duct tape on it. And I've worked at a slaughterhouse for 6 years, so I know where to go to, any deer hunter or anybody like that that's skinned, how to feel the joints. And
This is an interesting justification he tries to make several times throughout the interview, trying to downplay his actions as a totally normal thing any deer hunter or slaughterhouse employee would be able to do, as though there are many people in these fields that would even think of doing something this horrendous. In reality, very few people, regardless of their profession or skill in butchering animals, would even know where to begin when faced with the task of applying their skills to the body of a fellow human being.
that was taking too long, but I did. I started with her head. I cut her head off first.
Did you put any plastic or anything down, or you just
No.
right there on the floor?
No, that floor was covered with blood.
Did you move the carpet out of there? I think there's green carpet or
And there's some blue carpet in there. I was going to pull it up, and my knife wasn't sharp enough
the pocket knife I got off the.
to do what I was wanting to do quickly. So I got the axe, cut off her hands, or at least I busted the bone with the axe, and then I used the knife and I cut off her feet.
Bear in mind that up to this point, Scott has maintained that he had a woman die in his home accidentally, and panicking went about disposing of the body in the quickest way he knew how. This next part, however, reveals the true depth of his depravity, and is one of the most sickening and disgusting confessions we've ever heard.
And I was going to eat some of her, so I kind of cut off some of her, rump and part of her back strap.
Backstrap is a term used by hunters to describe the long strip of muscle that runs parallel to the animal's spine, and is a particularly prized cut of meat and big game for being the most tender and flavorful, because it isn't a muscle often used by four-legged animals. Because human beings are not four-legged game animals and therefore cannot be split into similar cuts of meat, there's no telling what muscles Scott actually tried hacking out of Lisa's body. But just the fact he thought of doing this at all and goes on to use these terms to describe her body shows how little regard he holds for her and the life he took. Detectives are understandably thrown by this.
So did you cut her backstrap out?
Part of it.
Part of it. Did you keep any of it?
It's all in those buckets.
This is interesting because, according to the autopsy, only the lower arms, legs, hands, feet, and head were present in the buckets when collected by police. No backstrap was found, though again, what exactly Scott is referring to is unknown. But his words flow too smoothly here compared to his other lies, so it seems that regardless of what he managed to actually do, he viewed Lisa as little more than an animal to be slaughtered. He went out of his way to cut out what he thought would be the tastiest portions of her.
The body's underneath the fire pit.
What about the legs? Are they in the buckets or in the fire pit?
Both.
You got a refrigerator or anything up there in your garage? Is any piece of anything in there?
No. Now I flipped her over, and I cut up her belly, and reached up and cut her heart out.
What'd you do with it?
I slung it.
Was it out in the yard somewhere?
Did you sling it straight from the garage or to the left?
No, it was like-
to the field?
Like where those buckets are, and there's a fence.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of just because Mom was coming out. And
So you just sort of slung it across the driveway?
She kept saying, but Mom and Dad was noticing them talking about, what's Clyde keep smelling? What's Clyde keep smelling?
Clyde seems to be the family dog, though this isn't confirmed.
And this was Friday night?
And this was today. And I went and built a fire, and I tried to burn her remains. And I was going to bury the heads, or the head, and the other body parts.
So the pieces that you cut, the back strap and whatnot, you went ahead and burnt them, or are they in a bucket too?
They're in the buckets.
They're in the buckets. But you never did fry any of her up or cook any of her or nothing, or did you ever eat any of it?
Yeah.
You did? What part did you eat?
Piece of meat off the leg that while she was in the fire.
While it was cooking? How big a piece do you think it was? Just, okay, about the size of an egg.
Yeah.
Was it cooked up pretty good, or was it still semi-raw?
It was juicy. It didn't taste like blood, though. I mean, but it tasted like a charbroiled piece of steak.
Similarly to how Scott was trying to convince the detectives of Lisa's burning passion for him, he also seems to be trying to convince them that what he did wasn't despicable or utterly insane, because she just tasted like steak.
Well, let me ask you this. Before you cut her up, or any time during you cut her up, did you drink any of her blood, or did you have to with her again?
No.
Okay. So basically what you done, you just got busy of trying to dispose of her. Did you take any other organs out? Just the heart? Okay.
If you really wasn't sure why she was dead, why didn't you call somebody to come up there and check on her?
Because something else was in control.
So in a way, you wanted her to be dead?
I don't know what was going on in my head.
It's curious that Scott keeps mentioning how he wasn't in control of his actions while at the same time providing excruciating detail on exactly what those actions were, and at times, exactly why he did them. It's possible that he may be trying to set up a half-hearted attempt at an insanity defense throughout the interview, but isn't really sure how to go about it.
Had she made you mad or anything at night?
Not really. She just irritated me a little bit.
It's clear that detectives are trying to find some possible motive for this murder and the horrific acts that swiftly followed, as it seems unlikely that it was simply an accident. As it turns out, the next part may reveal a bit of what Scott's true motivation might be.
I know, me and you talked about this last time, but I talked to you after Tales. I can't remember if you was telling me that you was reading books about serial killers or if it was the movies you was telling me about.
Wasn't
you reading some books at one time?
I was just studying about them, just watching like biographies.
What's your favorite movie to watch as far as serial killers?
No, I was doing the biographies, the real stories. And I'd look up on the internet.
Like Jeffrey Dahmer? Or...
Yeah. My favorite one is Richard Ramirez.
Ramirez, was he the one that...
He was the Night Stalker.
Richard Ramirez, a.k.a. the Night Stalker, was an American serial killer who terrorized the Southern California region in the mid-'80s, killing at least 13 people and assaulting countless others. According to some articles on this case, Scott reportedly wrote on his Facebook page on the day of Ramirez's death, "R.I.P. Night Stalker, wish I could have met you." However, this couldn't be verified.
The Night Stalker, that's right. John Wayne Gacy, or...
I've read about Gacy. I mean, I got on a bad serial killer kick a few years back, and that's all I put on my Facebook was just videos, because I don't listen to exactly what you call mainstream music. And, I'd find videos of serial killers and, by different bands where they're playing and, this video footage of different killers. And I told her, I was like, I'm wanting to check into a psychiatric hospital and just thinking about it too much.
This admission is very interesting, as it could suggest that Scott had in fact fantasized about committing the same types of depraved acts as the serial killers he had an admittedly unhealthy obsession with, which may explain why he was so quick to start destroying Lisa's body so soon after her supposedly accidental demise. Detectives seem to start thinking along the same lines, as their next few questions focus on the ideas presented by the idea Scott may have been acting out serial killer fantasies.
I guess things went sour before I could get to one. Marcus and Ben always kicks me out. I'll be there a day or 2 or 3.
You're fine, go home.
Yeah.
Is this the only person that you ever hurt like that?
Yes.
Have you ever tried doing anything else? Dogs, cats?
I'm an animal lover.
I thought you had a dog up there at one time.
Yeah. I mean, I worked in a slaughterhouse, but
Where'd you work out, Champions?
worked there on and off for 6 years.
For Charlie and them out there?
Mm-hmm. We had a bad falling out.
So when you were having with her and she wanted you to start choking her out, what was your thoughts? What was going through your head then? Were you thinking, this is my opportunity, I'm just going to choke her out and live out one of my fantasies, or
Pretty much.
opportunity was a knocking, wasn't it?
Yeah. You know what's up? We was going to go to a different damn liquor store, too. And we was right there about to pull in. She goes, wait. She goes, you can't go to Oak Candy. You owe that woman money. I was like, no, I paid her off. So she just went all the way to Oak Liquor instead of stopping at Westmead.
Maybe it was fate. Who knows?
This last statement seems to be Detective Parton taking a weak stab at one of the principles of the Reed technique, perhaps presenting an alternative theory to get Scott to admit to more details because the alternative makes the crime sound not that bad. It's at this point that the interview deviates from Lisa's cold-blooded murder and takes a rambling turn into Scott's personal life, starting with the other failed relationships with women he's had in the past and the misdemeanor charge for possession of drug paraphernalia that was still pending at the time of the murder, none of which, of course, were ever his fault. It's interesting to note that he blames the paraphernalia charge entirely on the woman he was seeing at the time, saying,
Yeah, it's misdemeanor paraphernalia. And me and this girl hooked up on a blind date. She was from Winchester. I couldn't get her to leave. Somebody called the police or something and said that I was dealing drugs and all this. And I ain't no drug dealer. I'm a user.
This seems to be a running theme in Scott's life, that he never does anything wrong, the bad things that happen to him are never his fault, and that he's so irresistible to crazy women, they all immediately want to live with him. The detectives offer no comment on this, instead trying to steer Scott back to the matter of Lisa, and while Scott does answer their questions, it's now only between stories about himself, random details on his life, or any random thought that seems to cross his mind.
Read on here about serial killers and stuff like that. Was you thinking about keeping any body parts at all?
It crossed my mind. And I thought about keeping her skull because, I'm all the time messing with masks and Halloween decorations, stuff like that. And I was like,
For those of you keeping track, Scott has now referred to the victim as a slaughtered animal and is now comparing her to a Halloween decoration, further indicating how little regard he had for Lisa Hyder's life. Eventually, the exhausted detectives wrap up the nearly 3-hour interview by reading Scott's overwrought confession back to him, and he signs it. Gregory Scott Hale pleaded guilty to first-degree murder on January 15, 2015, and though on the surface this may seem as though he was finally taking responsibility for his actions, in recent years he claims he was charged and sentenced unjustly on the grounds of religious persecution, the religion in question implied to be Satanism. However, there's no concrete evidence that Gregory Scott Hale was a practicing theistic or atheistic Satanist, or were there any signs of satanic literature, paraphernalia, or religious symbolism found anywhere near the crime scene, aside from a crudely rendered Leviathan cross scribbled on a sheet of notebook paper on a dusty desk. Some point to one Leviathan cross as a sign that Scott was a practicing Satanist. However, on this same desk, in a place of equal prominence, there was a Star Trek fan collective Borg DVD. But few have pointed to this as evidence that he worshipped the Borg Queen. Scott never mentioned Satanism or any other alternative belief systems in his interview. While a handful of the news articles written after his arrest briefly bring up Satanism as a possible motive, it appears they're basing the assumption that Scott worshipped the devil on his love of metal music, the album covers of which adorn his Facebook page, and dark comedy. Scott also goes on to complain that all of the articles only include the bad things about him, allegedly writing, "Y'all only put up the bad. I've been